Welcome back to the Forgive Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Brenda Reese. I really appreciate you being here today because for the month of July, or at least a few weeks, I want to spend some time talking about emotional freedom. Not emotional freedom like as a big dramatic life change. It's not that. It's not like leaving everything behind, starting over, or making a decision that everyone can see from the outside. I want to talk about the kind of emotional freedom that begins quietly, the kind that begins inside of you, the kind that starts when you stop leaving yourself behind. Now, for so many of us women, especially those of us that are capable, responsible, loving, high functioning, and used to holding so much together, emotional freedom does not always begin with a huge decision. Most of the time, it begins with one honest moment. The moment you admit you're not fine. The moment when you notice you are saying yes. When everything inside you says no, right? The moment you realize you are keeping the peace outside of you while inside, you don't feel very peaceful. The moment you recognize that you have been making someone else's comfort more important than your own truth. Okay, we've been talking about this, and I really want to bring this home through these next couple episodes because it's worth repeating some of these things that we are continually doing. So that way we can make a change for ourselves, right? When we finally can break down these patterns that we've been living pretty much unconsciously or subconsciously, it's really important because this is where our emotional freedom begins. It's not about knowing everything. It's not about being brave all the time. In fact, it's not about being brave. It's being resilient. We're pretty resilient. And it is also because you begin to come back home to yourself. And that is what we're going to talk about today and over the next few episodes. Today is about the freedom to stop leaving yourself behind. Now, what does it mean to leave yourself behind? Well, when we say that, or when I say that, it can kind of sound harsh, right? And for those of us that have abandonment wounds, it can be a bit activating, right? About leaving ourselves behind. That's not my intention. It's not about being activated. It's more about being really super honest with ourselves. Because you may hear what I just said about leaving ourselves behind and think, oh, I would never do that. I take care of myself. I take bubble baths. I take 5 minutes and I breathe. But, is that enough? This is a pattern that many of us have been doing for years without even realizing it. So that's why it's worth repeating, is because the more we hear this, the more it's going to make sense to us. And the more we're going to go, oh yeah, that's me. Now, I also want to tell you that this pattern of leaving ourselves behind doesn't look like a self-betrayal like we've talked about before. It looks like being kind. It looks like being loyal. It looks like being responsible, being flexible, being the easy one. It looks like keeping the peace, and it looks like us being the person that everyone can count on, right? And there's secondary gains to all of that. And those qualities are often praised. Yet we do not notice the cost. We do not notice that we are slowly disconnecting from ourselves. We do not notice that we are dismissing our needs, that we are quieting our truth, or we do not notice that we are making decisions based on how someone else might react. And we do not notice that we are asking, what do they need from me, before we ever ask, what do I need? Leaving yourself behind can look like, of course, like we've been talking about, saying yes when you mean no, saying you are fine when you are not. It's like laughing something off that actually hurt you. It can look like not asking for help because you do not want to be a burden. It can look like over-explaining your boundary so someone else will not be upset. All right, let's raise hands on that one. I know we do that. I did. It can look like staying quiet because speaking up feels too risky or challenging. Like, I wouldn't speak up because I was afraid of being made fun of, or that I wouldn't know how to respond to their response. It can look like pretending something doesn't bother you because you do not want to make things harder. Maybe it's ignoring what your body already knows. It can look like needing rest. All right, let's get real on this one. It can look like needing rest and feeling guilty for taking it. It can look like staying in a conversation or a pattern or a role or a relationship dynamic long after your inner self has been whispering, "This is costing me." Now, if you've recognized yourself in any of this is not a moment to shame yourself. This is not about that. This is to help you and me understand ourselves. Because most of the time, the part of us that learned to leave ourselves, it wasn't trying to hurt us. She was surviving. She was trying to belong. She was trying to keep love. She was trying to avoid conflict. She was trying to make things work with the tools she had at the time for real. That is why self-forgiveness is such an important part of the emotional freedom path. Because without self-forgiveness, awareness can turn into another way that we punish ourselves. But with self-forgiveness, awareness becomes the doorway. Instead of asking what is wrong with me, we begin to ask, what happened that taught me to leave myself? That question changes everything. Now, one of the reasons this pattern can be hard to recognize is because it often hides inside our strengths. Many of the women I work with, oh my goodness, are incredibly capable. They're intuitive, responsible, successful, thoughtful. They know how to handle a lot. They know how to lead. They know how to care for everyone else. They know how to anticipate what needs to be done 3 to 5 steps ahead. They are the ones people turn to. They are the ones who figure it out. They are the ones who hold things together. Is that you? Right? Yeah, I think that's most of us. Most of us high achieving women. And on the outside, they look fine. Fact, they look more than fine. They look strong. They look accomplished, dependable. They look like they have it all together. Yet inside, they're exhausted, emotionally tired. Tired of being the one who understands. Tired of being the one who adjusts all the time. Tired of being the one who keeps forgiving without also telling the truth. Tired of being the one who carries the emotional weight no one else sees. Of being needed, but not always known. Tired of being appreciated for what they do, but not met in who they are. This is where emotional freedom becomes so important, because emotional freedom does not ask you to stop being loving. It does not ask you to stop caring, or it doesn't ask you to become cold or harsh or unavailable, right? Like the program, like they say to us, okay, if we set up a boundary, we're called a bitch, right? That's the truth. If we aren't that soft kind of, giving in person, we get called names. We get called cold, harsh, bitchy, all the stuff. What emotional freedom does is it asks you to include yourself in the love that you give. It asks you to stop disappearing in the name of being good. It asks you to stop confusing self-sacrifice with devotion. It asks you to stop calling it peace when the only person suffering silently is you. Now, that's a very different kind of freedom, because real peace, the real peace, includes you. Real peace does not require you to silence your truth. Real peace does not require you to ignore your needs. Peace does not require you to shrink so someone else can stay comfortable. Oh my God, did I do that? And for many of us women, that realization right there is both freeing and it's also really tender. Because, when you first begin to see where you have left yourself behind, there's going to be grief. Grief for the years you tried so hard. Grief for the needs you dismissed. Grief for the moments you knew something did not feel right, but did not know how to choose differently. Grief for the younger version of you who thought love had to be earned by overgiving. And if that grief does come up, I really want you to be gentle with yourself. Grief is not a sign you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are finally telling yourself the truth. Now, I've had this come up a lot. I've really, especially, I'm going to say menopausally, really kind of brought this out because I believe going through perimenopause and menopause, it's not something that doesn't mean our body hates us. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with us. It means that this is a physiological change within our bodies. And if you look at the research, it kind of shows us where our brain changes. I was listening to some research on how when estrogen comes in, right, when we are going through when we say in our teenage years, right? And puberty, that's where we become relational. We learn somehow that we need to keep the peace. We don't speak up for ourselves. They've done studies where they studied the boys and the girls up until a certain age. Then what happens in perimenopause and menopause is that we kind of lose that, not that we're not relational, but we're able to kind of go, wait a second. As we lose the estrogen and our hormones start to change, I think that's when our truth is revealed. So it's really important. I know the research on this is fabulous. And I feel like this is our wisdom years when we come into perimenopause and menopause. And we can start to really understand ourselves better, love ourselves, because really there hasn't been studies, there hasn't been information about it, except for it's something to fear. And we look at all the scary parts of it when actually we can reclaim ourselves. We can actually become stronger. And I have been doing that, especially going through the grief and being able to finally allow myself to grieve the woman that I wasn't, the people-pleasing woman who didn't have a voice, the woman who looked to men for approval and validation, the me that went through some really hard abuse and just kept going though. So I'm proud, so proud of all the parts of me and myself for being resilient and keep going because we are, my God, we give birth. Come on. So, that also came up in over the last couple of years as I was going through the different things that you've heard me talk about on the podcast about my husband with dementia and then my husband walking in on him with another woman at the memory care and all those things that happened. And what was able to come up though through this was the grief, the deep, deep grief that wasn't about him really. It was about my life. It was about all those times I didn't stand up. All those times I was the good girl, the good wife, the good employee, the good friend, the good something. And I started to recognize how deep that ran and that it wasn't just me, that this was actually part of, I'm going to say our training, our programming. This is a part of what we're taught. But it doesn't have to be. It doesn't mean we're not kind or loving. In fact, being able to step into our own power, being able to be compassionate with ourselves, brings us more forward in relationships so that we can be more loving, more kind, more compassionate, because boundaries, just like when we're raising kids or even with animals and pets, they need boundaries. So do we. Most of us women don't even figure out we don't have boundaries until we get into midlife. So I want to encourage you just to listen to yourself. You know, all those years, all those things that I did, I wasn't trying to abandon myself. I was trying to survive, doing what I knew, right? The best I was doing the best that I could. And I still am. But now I'm doing it with more awareness. Because before I was trying to make things work. I was trying so hard to be loved. I was trying to hold something together, right? And that's why self-forgiveness matters so much, because it allows us to look back with compassion instead of punishment. It allows us to say, I understand why I did what I did with what I knew then. And I am also allowed to choose differently now. Yes, I am very passionate about this. Okay, off that soapbox for a moment. All right. Now, one of the ways we begin to recognize where we have left ourselves behind is by paying attention to resentment. Now, resentment can be uncomfortable to admit, right? Goes back to that training and what we're taught. And many of us judge ourselves for being resentful. We're not, it's like, oh, that's being really mean. That's what I would tell myself. I just need more compassion. This is, they're just doing the best they can. So why am I being so harsh? We think we need more understanding, more patience, more forgiving, more grateful, more generous. Yet resentment, in my world, is often trying to tell us something. It may be a signal that we have been giving from an empty place. It may be a signal that we've been saying yes, right? To even ourselves when we mean no. Like resting, like stopping at a certain time, like not continually trying to go, go, go. I found myself doing that recently. My body was exhausted and I was pushing through. And I finally realized it, like, oh, there's that pattern again. Okay, I have to stop. And I did. So it's not that we get perfect at this, because I certainly am not, but I recognize myself sooner. And that's really what we want, the awareness, right? Being a door that opens to the possibility of change. Resentment may be a signal that we have been expecting others to notice what we have not been willing to name. A lot of us expect other people to know what we're thinking, what we need. They can't unless we name it. Resentment may be a signal that we have been overextending ourselves and calling it love. It may be a signal that we've been participating in a pattern that no longer feels honest, like rushing, being busy, taking care of everyone else first. Now, a lot of time it's a way of telling us our boundaries have been crossed, especially when it brings up anger. Now, we have a lot of deep anger, okay? And it can spark, especially going through menopause. It can come up in very interesting ways. But it's nothing. I'm going to say it this way. I've learned to not be afraid of it. A lot of us women are taught to be afraid of it only because it feels like so huge. And no one's ever really helped us to understand our emotion. And the reason why it's so huge is because we've been burying it for a long time. Not our fault, not your fault, right? But anger can tell us when our boundaries are being crossed. And sometimes resentment is not just anger, because I really think this is important. A lot of times resentment is grief. Grief for all the moments you did not choose yourself. Grief for the part of you that kept waiting for someone else to notice you were tired. Grief for the needs that went unspoken. Grief for the woman who kept going because she did not know what else to do. When we understand resentment in this way, we can stop using it as another reason to judge ourselves. This is where we can bring in the energy of curiosity. We can ask, what is this resentment trying to show me? Where have I been giving more than I truly have to give? Where have I been silent when I needed to speak my truth? Where have I been hoping someone else would give me permission to honor what I already know? This is where emotional freedom becomes a practice. Not perfection, like I said earlier, but practice. Okay? This is where, like we've talked about before, where we pause before saying yes. A practice of every time you tell yourself the truth, every time you let your needs matter, you're practicing. Every time you stop explaining away your discomfort, you're practicing. And every time you come back to yourself, instead of leaving yourself behind, this, my friend, is emotional freedom. So now you know that this podcast I like to make experiential, so more experiential than teaching. So I want to offer you a few reflection questions. Okay. Now you can pause the episode after each one if you want, write them down, or really just listen. Okay. Because these questions are for inner reflection and not for you to judge yourself, not for you to make yourself wrong, not to shame yourself. This is about noticing your truth. I'm really going to gently encourage you to notice your truth. All right. So let's start with these. Where am I leaving myself behind right now? Okay. Where am I saying yes when I mean no? Where am I pretending something is okay when it is not? Where am I making my peace dependent on someone else's approval? And where am I quieting my truth to keep someone else comfortable? Where am I over explaining because I do not trust that my truth is enough? That was a big one for me. I over explain myself all the time instead of just saying my truth. And where am I waiting for someone else to give me permission to honor what I already know? Okay, these are important. And I know they're sticky and I know that they can be a bit painful. And I know you might have your feathers ruffled just a little bit at me right now. And if that is happening, that means that these are resonating with the part of you, the bigger self that says, yes, finally, let's stop. Yeah. All right. The second question. So that was a lot of first questions. But the second question is, what do I know that I keep questioning? So this is a really powerful question because often the knowing is already there. It may be quiet, it may be inconvenient, and it may be super uncomfortable, but it's there. That's that no, right? That's when we're afraid we're going to disappoint someone. That's the time that, things might be uncomfortable. Sometimes we keep questioning what we know because honoring it would require us to change something. It may require us to speak, to grieve, to let someone be disappointed. It might require us to choose ourselves in a way that feels very unfamiliar. So that second question is, what do I know that I keep questioning? I didn't bring up in my third marriage that I knew he was having an affair because I didn't want to change. I know it sounds weird, right? But my truth, I was hurt. But I was afraid. I was afraid to bring things so codependent. I was really codependent. And but the gosh, honest truth was the fact of I didn't want things to be different. I didn't want to think he didn't love me. And there's been other times where I didn't speak up because I didn't want to rock the boat. I learned that from a very young age. So asking that question, what do I know that I keep questioning? Let's trust our gut, shall we? Okay. The third question is, what would choosing myself look like in one small way this week. Just one, not 100, right? We're not overhauling our whole life, just one. Let's give you some ideas. Maybe it's resting when you're tired. Maybe it's, like we've talked about before, I need time to think about that. Maybe it's not responding immediately. That's a big one. Pausing. Maybe it is not volunteering to fix something that is not yours to fix. Okay, where are my fixers? I'm raising my hand. Maybe it is telling the truth in your journal before you tell it to anyone else. Here's a big one. Maybe it is asking for help. And maybe it is receiving support. That was a big one for me that I realized recently, that it was huge, where I realized I was only letting support in to a certain level. And I really needed some help as I was getting ready to go through a surgery. And I couldn't do things on my own. I really needed support in a very vulnerable way. And it really brought up the fact to me that, oh, here's another area that I can change, that I can support myself. And I also give the gift to other people of being able to be supportive. So don't forget that. Okay. And because maybe it is also forgiving yourself for all the times you did not know how to choose yourself. So you're just going to choose one small way. That's how emotional freedom begins to grow. Now, before we close, I want to remind you of this. If you are beginning to see the ways you have left yourself behind, please do not use that awareness against yourself. This is an invitation to return, to listen, to forgive, an invitation to choose one small act of self-honoring this week. You do not have to shame the woman you were in order to become more of who you are. You can honor the version of you who survived, adapted, overgave, stayed quiet, and she tried so damn freaking hard. Because you know what? You can choose differently now. That's the beauty of self-forgiveness. It gives you the way to tell the truth without not turning it into punishment. It gives you a way to learn from the past without living under the weight of it. It gives you a way to come home to yourself. Emotional freedom does not always begin with a big decision. Most of the time, it is one honest pause, a moment where you ask yourself, what am I really feeling? One moment where you admit what you really need, and one moment where you stop making someone else's comfort more important than your own peace. One moment where you remember, I matter here too. And that's the beginning of emotional freedom. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I cherish our time together. Now, if this episode spoke to you, I invite you to kind of go back and listen to those questions again. Spend a few moments with them and notice what comes up for you. Remember, we're not judging. We're not fixing anything. We are just listening, because I think that's important. We haven't given ourselves the opportunity to just listen. One, if you're like me, because I was afraid of what would come up. I realized that when I finally started giving myself, through this deeper work, I started giving myself the space, and tears came up, sadness came up, grief came up, anger came up. But when I allowed it to come up and go through me without judging it, it didn't last a whole long time. Listening to yourself is one of the first ways you begin to come home to you. All right, until next time, remember that you matter. You matter a lot. Take care. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did enjoy it, would you do me a favor and share this episode and then follow us on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss one episode of the Forgive Yourself podcast, where every Friday you will get tips, tools, and stories so that you can turn your pain into peace. Take care.